importance of sun, vitamin D, sunscreen, squiggly lines. I guess this stuff could be important. Someone worked hard on it. I guess we'll talk about the sun today. What's up, everybody? My name is Gilbert Church. I'm a high school strength and conditioning coach. I'm a PE teacher in Harlem. And today, if you haven't guessed already, we are talking about the sun, Ra, the sun god, okay? And we are going to be talking about whether or not it is actually a crucial part of your health, right? This big old health puzzle that we've been working on for a year. Sleep, nutrition, community, exercise, and now the sun, right? Is this another piece to it? And you may be surprised at what you find because for the longest possible time ever, we have been told that the sun is bad, you need to wear sunscreen whenever you interact with it, staying indoors is probably the most helpful thing you can do for your skin, and a plethora of stuff that is sort of almost weirdly anti-sun when it comes down to humans. So we're gonna take a dive into what the sun can do to harm you, we're gonna take a dive into what the sun can do to help you, and then we're gonna sort of mix those two together and say what's a proper recommendation of sunlight and how can we use it to best affect our health and put us in the best optimal position for our health. Let's get right to it. So let's start with the bad. And there are bad sides to deep, excessive exposure to the sun. If you are going to the beach, the sun is at its zenith, or it's 11 o'clock to 2 o'clock, and you just lay there, no sunscreen, and you're as white as I am, and you get a deep, deep burn, and the thought is, hey, I'm just gonna take a couple cold showers, I'm gonna make sure this burn turns into a tan. There are some minor problems with this. The first being that sunburn can cause permanent damage to the skin, and it can cause your skin to wrinkle, right? Our skin wrinkles when our skin loses its elasticity. And it's been shown numerous times that if you get a sunburn, your skin does lose elasticity if the sunlight and the UV rays penetrate deep enough into the skin. To further that, if you get blistering sunburns, and it's happened more than once, your chances increase for melanoma, which is skin cancer. I guess we're kind of stating the obvious here. You don't want to actively get sunburned. You don't want to actively go outside and have zero protection for long amounts of time in the sunlight when it's at its strongest, let's say during the summer. These are bad things. Those can be harmful for the sun, no doubt here. However, right, the fear of these things has caused us to miss out on a lot of benefits that we get from the sun. And again, if you've been watching this channel for any certain amount of time, you know we look at health through this evolutionary biology sort of point of view. And it really doesn't make too much sense that we would be completely terrible at handling sunlight from an evolutionary point of view. It's always there, it's always raining down on us, and 70,000 years ago, we did not have buildings like this. We could not just work inside all day. We had to be outside, we had to be hunting, we had to be farming, we had to be gathering food, right? This modern era of my ability to work inside and stare at a screen all day long didn't happen until about, I don't know, 50, 40 years ago. The idea that a school can have no windows is fairly mind-blowing to me. But that is the modern age. So our lack of sun exposure, while it may protect us from sunburn and melanoma, has caused a huge avalanche of other problems because the sun actually plays some critical roles in our health. So this is the bad, but don't let the bad overlook the good. And let's talk about the good. Sunlight is awesome, and there's a lot of reasons why it's awesome. And let's start with the big one right from the get-go, which is when our skin is exposed to UVA and UVB rays, which come from the sun, our skin actually begins to produce vitamin D. Yes, we are like Superman. When we are exposed to the sun, we actually rebuild ourselves. And this vitamin D is a really, really big deal because vitamin D is an incredibly important nutrient that our body uses to stave off a ton of chronic disease and really, really importantly, creates for fantastic bone health. So it's not just calcium in that picture, vitamin D is also a big player when it comes to that. In fact, in the 1800s, we learned that vitamin D is a major source of curing rickets. And if you don't know what rickets is, it's this horrendous bone disease that children can get when they have severely low levels of vitamin D. It looks horrendous, just look at these pictures. Whew! Right? It was found that when kids were exposed to the sun early, they got 10 to 15 minutes of direct sun exposure. They were far, far safer from developing this horrendous disease called rickets. So that is awesome just from that standpoint. And vitamin D goes on to fight a lot of really, really awesome things, right? People who have high levels of vitamin D or have normal levels of vitamin D, aka they're not below the standard amount that you need each day, show signs that they are more resistant to cancer, they have lower cases of heart attack, and they have lower cases of type 2 diabetes. Fantastic stuff, right? Vitamin D helps us stave off chronic disease to a really, really high degree and even boosts our immune system. Furthermore, it regulates our circadian rhythm. And if you followed this channel for long enough, you know I am sleep obsessed, and anything that can help your sleep is going to help your health. Again, we look at it from this evolutionary point of view. So when we woke up, the sun would rise, right? And we woke up because the sun rose. And then 50,000 years ago, when the sun would go down, we would go to sleep because, hey, you can't hunt and gather and do all those things at night because we're not nocturnal creatures. So it was this regulation of our circadian rhythm, and our sun was a big part of that. Now fast forward to the modern age, we can work inside, we have artificial light, we no longer need the sun to see what we're doing, and that has really, really thrown off our circadian rhythms and damaged our ability to sleep well, right? Anything we can do to improve our sleep, including exposure to the sun, is something that we need to do because it is so crucial to our health. Finally, it makes you happy, right? So when I say it makes you happy, think about it. That may sound kind of general and kind of strange, but when you walk outside on a beautiful, clear blue day, not a cloud in the sky, slight breeze, and you're just like, oh, this is the best. That's kind of like a ubiquitous feeling throughout the human race. And researchers were wondering, like, is this something placebo? Is this just something we do when the sun is out? Or is there a biological reason for it? And it turns out when we absorb sunlight, not only are we creating vitamin D, we are also creating other enzymes and things that release endorphins to our system. So when we get endorphins flooding up to our brain and we just go, oh, this feels great, right? That's actually a real thing. There's a biological reason for it. So there's a massive great stuff with sunlight, and we shouldn't skip out on it just because there is some risk of cancer and some risk of sunburn, right? The host of benefits outweighs the dangers, in my opinion, provided we have the right recommendation and the right dose of sunlight. So let's talk about what those recommendations would be and what that dose should look like. Here we go. Now, as much as I would love to tell you, hey, go outside, get 10 minutes of sunlight, come back inside, you're good to go. Vitamin D production is check, your health is in check, and you are gonna sleep great tonight. I can't. It's not that simple. There's a lot of nuance to this, and that's why there's so many things written up here when we're talking about a recommendation for a dose of sunlight. So let's start with the first one. 10 to 15 minutes of direct sun exposure for lighter skinned people, and 2x to 10x that amount for darker skinned people. And the reason for this is evolutionary biology. People who have lived next to the equator and grown up next to the equator for a long amount of time have come up with a simple and elegant solution for stopping sunburn and melanoma, which is melanin, right? Melanin is simply the coloring of the skin, which is when you're exposed to the sun, your body produces melanin to stop extra UVA and UVB rays from penetrating deep into your skin and damaging it, right? In fact, you can even see it on me a little bit, right? So here's the top of my forearm, blindingly white, and here's the bottom of my forearm, which you probably can't see anymore because it's even whiter, okay? But the idea is my skin was exposed, right? The top part of my forearm was exposed to the sun a little bit more often than the bottom part, and my body's reaction to that is to create melanoma. Not melanoma, melanin. So you can even see it in any country around the world. Countries close to the equator, think Haiti, the Dominican Republic, right? Those people are very, very dark skinned. Now contrast that with someone, let's say from Sweden, right? Those people are very, very fair skinned, right? It depends on how close you are to the equator. Now, People with fair skin do not block UVA and UVB rays because they get way less exposure to the sun because they're so far north of the equator, which means their skin is very, very fair skin and they have very little melanin because they need to produce all the vitamin D they possibly can while living in those places that have very little direct sunlight all the time. Whereas people who have ample amounts of sunlight near the equator need to protect themselves from the sun, and they create melanin to do so. The problem being, if you have a ton of melanin in your skin, if you are very, very dark skinned by nature or by genetics, right, that means you're gonna need more sun exposure to make sure that it penetrates deep enough that you start creating vitamin D and start protecting your health with that. So that's the reason for less time for fair-skinned people and more time for dark-skinned people. The next thing to know when we're talking about recommendations for sunlight is that when you get your sun exposure, it must be between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. And the reason for this is that our Earth's atmosphere actually blocks some of the UVA and UVB rays that come from the sun. And those are the rays that are necessary for, again, us to reap health benefits. And the reason for that is tilt of the Earth, right? So at between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m., our Earth is tilted at the point where there's the most direct sunlight coming through. And let's say I'm right here on the Earth, here's the Earth, boom, it's hitting me. Whereas if the Earth is turned to here, it's about to turn to midnight, it's cutting through a lot more cross-section of the atmosphere. And that means when you're watching the sunset, you know, you can see the sun, you're getting some sun exposure, but the rays aren't actually penetrating the atmosphere anymore, and they're not getting skin deep or deep enough into the skin where we produce vitamin D and get all that awesome health benefit. So this is time dependent on the day. When it is more direct, that is the most optimal time to actually absorb the sun's rays. This also goes along with seasonal recommendations, which is in the summertime, you need less sunlight. In the wintertime, you need more sunlight because, again, the tilt of the Earth is going to dictate how much of those rays penetrate the atmosphere. And what's kind of scary or neat to know about this is if you live in the Northeast or higher, you actually will not produce any vitamin D during the wintertime because of that tilt of the atmosphere is so much not in our favor. And they've done studies on this where people will sit outside in the sunlight, no shirt on in the middle of winter, and they do not produce any extra vitamin D. And that may be a place where you supplement with vitamin D. And speaking of supplements don't cut it. I got that written there. So I know I just made a recommendation for you to actually supplement, but compared to direct sunlight, supplementing with vitamin D as opposed to getting direct exposure to sun is way less efficient. Getting direct exposure to sun is something that's going to keep vitamin D in the bloodstream a lot more efficiently. In fact, it stays in the bloodstream twice as long as it does when you supplement with it. And just from a personal anecdotal experience, this may be placebo, it may be not, but when I am exposed to the sun, I feel much better. I feel like my health is better. I am in a much better mood and I sleep better. Whereas when I supplement with vitamin D, it just doesn't do the same thing. I feel worse in winter than I do in summer. Again, maybe placebo, maybe anecdotal, but that's echoed by a lot of people, and research sort of backs it up. Direct sun exposure, lots more vitamin D as opposed to supplementing with it. And then final bit here, no glass, no sunscreen. Again, when we're saying direct exposure to the sun, we mean direct, okay? So sunscreen is this awesome thing that you should use after 10 to 15 minutes maybe of direct sun exposure at the beach, right? Get your sun exposure and then put sunscreen on that blocks UVA and UVB rays. Funnily enough, right, you can sit in front of the glass and the sunlight can come through, but UVB rays do not penetrate through glass and they do not hit your skin and you do not produce vitamin D when you're exposed to sunlight through glass. So if you're trying to get your tan on and still stay inside and be warm during the wintertime, it doesn't actually work, so don't waste your time. So these are the recommendations for sunlight. Use them, better your health, better your performance. Boom, sunlight. Get some. And of course, like and subscribe.